This time, we list the legal woes of a one-woman brand and the heartaches of a Hollywood survivor. We chart the challenges of a silent genius and the public pain of an heiress. There's a classic line to sum up Mike Tyson, the one-time heavyweight champion of the world. Coming from the Bible via Thomas Hardy's great novel Tess of the D'Urbervilles, it's the line, "How the mighty are fallen," because they don't come much mightier than the man they called Iron Mike, nor do they fall much further.
Got into a confrontation and really know what Mike Tyson's about. He's a chump. So what happened in that? Mike Tyson hit a female and a male.
Hitting was Mike's business. Throughout his astonishingly successful boxing career, the heavyweight contender was virtually unstoppable. From the mid-1980s to the early 90s, he held the WBC, WBA and IBF World Heavyweight crowns. He was the first boxer to do so, briefly uniting a divided sport as the undisputed champion of champions. His achievements were the stuff of record books. In his first 2 years as a professional, he won 19 of his 22 fights by a knockout, and 14 of those were in the first round. In November 1986, he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, aged just 20 years and 4 months, when he took the World Boxing Council crown from Trevor Berbick. But scandal and crime soon overshadowed the self-described baddest man on the planet. In 1992, he served 3 years in an Indiana jail after being convicted of the rape of beauty queen Desiree Washington in an Indianapolis hotel. Back in the ring in June 1997, in one of the most controversial sporting events in recent times, he was disqualified at the end of the 3rd round of his rematch with title holder Evander Holyfield for biting off a piece of the champion's ear. 2 years later, he picked up another jail sentence, this time for assaulting a couple of motorists. He served 9 months. There was another assault charge in June 2003 after a brawl in a Brooklyn hotel. He also had terrible financial problems. Despite earning huge amounts throughout his career, including $30 million for that Holyfield fight alone, Mike filed for bankruptcy in August 2003. It's believed bad advice and lavish spending had frittered away nearly $300 million.
Please state your true and correct name.
Michael Gerard Tyson.
And what is your date of birth?
6/30/66.
What is the highest grade you finished in school?
10th grade.
And in September 2007, Mike faced court yet again, pleading guilty to cocaine possession and driving under the influence. How the mighty have fallen indeed. If you visit the website marthastewart.com these days, you'll find plenty of tips on decorating your home, revitalizing your garden, or conjuring up treats in the kitchen. Special times of the year, like Halloween, are particularly exciting for the one-woman brand name Martha Stewart, as she shares her favorite spooky snacks or innovative ways to carve a pumpkin in the jack-o'-lantern style. It's a formula that has worked very well for Martha for over 2 decades.
So now I'm going to make the
Born in 1941, the stockbroker and fashion model turned entrepreneur, author and homemaking guru has been one of the US's favorite domestic goddesses, since her first book on the subject, the ghost-written Entertaining, became a bestseller in the late 70s. From there, she went on to publish many books and articles. She also began to appear on such television programs as The Oprah Winfrey Show and Larry King Live. It wasn't long before she was fronting her own TV shows, with 1993 heralding the launch of a weekly half-hour show based on her own magazine, Martha Stewart Living, a publication that peaked in 2002 with a circulation of 2 million copies. To underline her success in the previous year, the Ladies' Home Journal named her as the 3rd most powerful woman in America. But behind the gingham curtains, all was not quite right in the sunny world of Martha Stewart. Ominous clouds were gathering on the horizon.
Insofar as the sentencing for Martha Stewart, she is going to get jailed. There is no doubt about that. The only question is, how long?
There have been suggestions that her problems can be traced right back to the early 70s, when she ended a very successful career as a stockbroker in order to focus on parenting her 8-year-old daughter, Alexis. But suspiciously, her departure coincided with a scandal regarding kickbacks from a troubled furniture company. Still, that slight whiff of financial malpractice was nothing compared to the situation in which she found herself embroiled 30 years later in 2002.
The likely range is between 15 to 21 months, given the fact that she was convicted of obstruction and lying to the authorities.
The crime she was accused of, despite maintaining her innocence, was insider trading after she sold her shares in the pharmaceutical company Imclone just days before it was announced that the company's application for a new drug had been rejected.
And for my family.
In March 2004, she was found guilty and convicted of conspiracy, obstruction of an agency proceeding, and making false statements to federal investigators. In July, she was sentenced to a 5-month prison term and a 2-year period of supervised release, including 5 months of home confinement. But on her release, she dived straight back into the world she knew so well, rejuvenating the business that had been rocked by the disgrace with the same determination and panache she applies to her domestic projects. In 2007, she was back at her magazine, back on TV, her status as the queen of domesticity restored, and her tips on Halloween pumpkin carving once again regarded as gospel.
Both sides of the chicken. 5 minutes on one side.
The son of a casting executive and actor, Christian Slater made a very promising start to his film career, starring in movies like Untamed Heart, True Romance, and Broken Arrow. But over the last few years, starring roles on the big screen have been a little thin on the ground for the actor, who now spends most of his time in stage shows in the UK. With Christian's acting talent not in question, his nose-diving Hollywood career is undoubtedly the result of spiraling problems in his private life. Many commentators have traced the start of his slide back to the circumstances of his casting in 1994's Interview with the Vampire. The story goes that Christian's friend River Phoenix was first choice for the role of the narrator, but with River barely cold from his fatal drug overdose, Christian was offered and accepted the part. Whether or not Christian felt guilty for capitalizing on his friend's death, he ended up handing over his fee for the movie to 2 of River's favorite charities. By 1997, Christian's own alcohol and drug addictions had got so out of hand that he punched his girlfriend in the face at a party and then bit a man who tried to protect her while he was high on heroin. In 2003, the boot was on the other foot when his wife Ryan Haddon allegedly hurled a glass at his head, opening up a gash that needed 20 stitches. The incident occurred during a major tiff in the couple's Las Vegas hotel room. Ryan skipped off before the police arrived, and Christian was carted off to hospital. When the police finally caught up with Ryan, Christian changed his story and claimed that the glass had simply slipped out of his wife's hand, and he refused to press charges. He was in the wars again a couple of years later, when he was arrested and charged with sexually harassing a woman on the street in New York at 2 a.m. He refused a plea deal, and the judge dismissed the charges against him on the condition that he did not reoffend within 6 months. 2 months later, while drunk at a party at Paris Hilton's neighbor's house, he reportedly fell off the roof. With her recent return to the big screen, Jane Fonda is proving to be one of Hollywood's most enduring and best-preserved stars. Now in her 70s, she looks terrific for someone with a much younger age tag, but Jane insists she's had no cosmetic help. And as the face of L'Oreal's anti-aging product range, she hopes to convince her gullible peers that they too can look like her, simply by taking good care of themselves. Whether or not she's on the level about her age-defying looks, she can certainly lay claim to great genetics. She's the spitting image of her father Henry, whose piercing blue eyes and razor-sharp cheekbones helped make him one of the great stars of Hollywood's golden age. But growing up the daughter of a celebrity was by no means idyllic. Henry was a cold and distant father, and Jane's socialite mother's descent into depression eventually led to her slitting her own throat when Jane was just 12 years old. In her 2005 autobiography, My Life So Far, Jane claimed her response to her troubled upbringing was to become obsessed with making things better for everybody. By 1970, after finding success as an actor in her own right, her acute sensitivity to the pain and suffering of others was fueling her growing passion for activism. And she became one of the first celebrities to use their star power to raise awareness of political issues. In Jane's case, the issue was the Vietnam War. Vocal in her denunciation of the US Army's presence in Nam, she and fellow actor Donald Sutherland formed the Free the Army tour. They went on an anti-war roadshow with their so-called political vaudeville, with the aim of talking to soldiers about their upcoming deployment to Vietnam. Jane ended up getting herself into hot water on her own trip to Vietnam in 1972. On a mission to investigate claims that the Nixon administration had been deliberately bombing the civilian dike system along the Red River, she was photographed sitting on a Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun. The photo earned her the epithet Hanoi Jane and caused outrage throughout Loyalist America, with many viewing it as an act of treason. The accusations of betrayal have been like a knife to the heart of the double Oscar winner, who was so passionately committed to doing the right thing. But all the abuse and death threats haven't daunted her activist spirits. She's been very active in the campaign to end violence against women in the Mexican border city of Ciudad Juarez, where more than 300 women have been murdered over the past 10 years. As well as marching to raise awareness of the desperate situation, Jane also participated in a special charity performance of Eve Ensler's play The Vagina Monologues. Along with Salma Hayek, she took the fight to the Mexican government. Her empathy with the plight of underprivileged women also took her to the slums of Bombay on a visit to the Female Crisis Center at Lokmanya Hospital. Tirelessly dedicated to improving the lives of women in the Third World, Jane has always put her money where her mouth is. And in 2001, she set up the Jane Fonda Center for Adolescent Reproductive Health at Emory University in Georgia. But Jane's sympathies are not reserved for the developing world. On meeting troubled teen queen Lindsay Lohan on the set of Georgia Rule in 2006, she was deeply moved.
She has an ability to access her emotions that's very beautiful. She's made me cry several times when I'm giving her the off-stage lines, and she's made me cry. She's very moving.
She reportedly took the young star under her wing, issuing a few stern words as well as some grandmotherly advice.
It was never as hard in my time as it is for her. I think, number one, it's important for a young celebrity like that to know that you gotta have more in your life than celebrity, because celebrity doesn't last, and then you'll be left with nothing. And the other thing is, it's not a dress rehearsal, this is life, and if you blow it, you may not get another chance.
The film itself, about child abuse and family, tapped into some of Jane's own painful memories.
I felt some of the same things that I felt while I was, makes me emotional, when I was doing On Golden Pond. It's about healing and forgiveness where there's been dysfunction, and don't we all know about dysfunction? So it's quite universal.
The 1981 film On Golden Pond, which she also co-produced, united Jane with her dying father Henry. It was Jane's last-ditch attempt to get close to the man who'd kept her at arm's length her whole life. In 2000, she flew to France to mourn the loss of another father figure, Roger Vadim. Jane fell in love with the charismatic French director in the early 60s, and they married in 1965. His films La Ronde and the 1968 science fiction spoof Barbarella turned her into a sex symbol, and they had a daughter together called Vanessa. In her autobiography, Jane depicted him as a party-loving womanizer who would often persuade her to take part in threesomes. His other famous loves included Catherine Deneuve, Brigitte Bardot, and his widow Marie-Christine Barrault. Jane remained friends with him until his death from lymphoma. After her divorce from Roger, she went on to marry politician Tom Hayden, who also cheated on her. Her most recent trip down the aisle was to media tycoon Ted Turner. Despite their great love for each other, Jane was eventually unable to cope with Ted's lack of compromise within the relationship. She finally divorced him in 2001 and drew on her experience with Ted to play J-Lo's worst nightmare in Monster-in-Law.
I spent, a good, wonderful 10 years with him, and he's a very over-the-top kind of flamboyant, outrageous character that's also lovable. And so I kind of learned, watching and being with him, what that might look like. So he kind of inspired me. He's not a monster, but he inspired me in kind of being outrageous.
In June 2004, TV Guide offered its list of the 50 greatest TV dads of all time. The diffident and quietly spoken actor Robert Young made number 6 for his portrayal of Jim Anderson, the genial patriarch in the hit US TV sitcom Father Knows Best. The show ran on NBC and CBS from 1954 to 1960, after being adapted from a radio show of the same name. Robert had sensibly made the move to television after a long but fairly undistinguished movie career, give or take the odd high points such as Hitchcock's Secret Agent in 1936 or 1947's Crossfire. Generally, he was regarded as always dependable, but a bland and negligible presence. It was said that many of Hollywood's top actresses preferred him as their co-star. Joan Crawford, Loretta Young, Claudette Colbert, and Katharine Hepburn were among those who knew that he would be professional, reliable, and probably most importantly, never upstage them. 6 years after Father Knows Best finished, he found a new role that captured the public's imagination. In 1969, he starred in the TV movie Marcus Welby, MD. This turned into a TV series that ran for 7 seasons, finally finishing in 1976, when Robert was 69. Unlike many acting stars, even Robert's private life seemed to mirror his professional one. He married Elizabeth Henderson, known as Betty, in 1933, and they remained together right up until her death in 1994. But Robert credits his wife for far more than spending over 60 years with him. For what his fans didn't know was that for nearly 3 decades he suffered from chronic alcoholism. In 1966, he had a nervous breakdown, and it took him 4 years to recover. In 1991, there was a suicide attempt believed to have been triggered by a chemical imbalance, along with his battle against Alzheimer's disease and heart difficulties. His eventual recovery from alcoholism owed much to Betty's support and encouragement to seek treatment. He also used spiritual metaphysics and often held AA meetings in his own home. Having finally thrown off his demons, he became a candid spokesperson, encouraging others that recovery was possible. And in Rock Island, Illinois, a community mental health center was named after him. He finally died of respiratory failure in 1998 at the grand old age of 91. Sex, religion, and politics, the 3 subjects we are told never to mention at dinner parties. Or, when he was alive, in the presence of Charlie Chaplin, perhaps. For despite enjoying one of the most successful and acclaimed careers in the history of cinema, Chaplin at various times saw sex, religion, and politics nearly derail his fortunes for good. The man most famous for his cinematic creation, The Little Tramp, began his film career after moving to the US from England in 1910, aged 21. He made his first screen appearance 4 years later and quickly graduated to making full-length films with complete artistic control, taking on producing, editing, writing, directing, and starring roles. He even wrote musical scores, belatedly winning an Academy Award for the theme tune to Limelight in 1972. Apart from his Limelight Oscar, he received 2 honorary Academy Awards, one in 1929 and one in 1972, when he returned from European exile to a 5-minute standing ovation from his peers. The cause for this exile can be traced back to the 1950s and Chaplin's political leanings. A long-time liberal, he became the subject of communist smears during the McCarthy years, and in 1952 found himself denied a re-entry visa to the US by J. Edgar Hoover after traveling to the UK. Disgusted, Chaplin moved to Switzerland, where he lived until his death in 1977. And on the religious front, he was also the target of anti-Semitism, despite there being no record of Jewish ancestry. But his greatest woes came from his relationships with the opposite sex. A serial seducer of co-stars and longtime admirer of women much younger than himself, Chaplin faced lurid headlines with his divorce from the less than half his age Lita Grey in 1928. But even these were overshadowed by his affair with the mentally ill Joan Berry in 1942, which saw him facing a paternity suit despite blood tests proving the child was not his. Even more seriously, he was charged under the Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act, banning the interstate transport of females for immoral purposes. Chaplin was acquitted, but his public image was severely dented for many years. Poor little rich girl Paris Hilton may not have suffered some of the hardships endured by her less fortunate peers, but she has had to deal with quite a few scrapes since hitting the headlines as a debutante socialite in 2001. She is heir to her father's real estate fortune and a share of the Hilton Hotel empire. But rather than sit back and wait for Inheritance Day, Paris has been busily cashing in on her ready-made celebrity status to build her own wealth. As well as her own chain of nightclubs, she's released 4 perfumes, several jewelry lines, a clothing range, and an album. With so much going on, it's hardly surprising that she's been a little careless at times. In 2004, she lost track of a homemade video of her and her ex-boyfriend Rick Salomon having sex. Within weeks, One Night in Paris was the most downloaded video on the web. The following year, she made herself unpopular with her friends after leaving her mobile phone lying around. Stars like Eminem, Lindsay Lohan, Christina Aguilera, Andy Roddick, and Anna Kournikova were deluged with calls when their phone numbers were splashed all over the net. She also had to contend with winning a Golden Raspberry Award for her screamer of a performance in the horror House of Wax.
How do you feel about winning the Raspberry?
What else?
Okay. Never mind. So tell me, what are you wearing
I don't
tonight?
want to do this interview now.
Okay.
She was also allegedly banned from attending an Elton John AIDS Foundation party for not coughing up the $10,000 entry ticket. But Paris's biggest reality check came in 2007, when after a string of driving and parking offences, she was sentenced to 45 days in jail for driving on a suspended licence. Her faithful publicist, Elliot Mintz, declared he was to blame and cleared out his desk. And after California's Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger turned a deaf ear to the pleas of clemency from Paris and her devoted fans, she packed her bags and headed off to LA's Central Regional Detention Center, where she ended up spending 22 days and nights.